This is Lightning Power Lunch with Dave Mishkin and Greg Linnelli on Lightning Radio.
We wanted to have a good start. We wanted to, get our legs back to back here. So, we did that on our first two shots, and I think we just kind of went from there.
Against a team that's been flying and was waiting for us, so to get the response and play the way we did is obviously we're very happy for that. So. We've been playing some really good hockey. I think yesterday with a bounce here and there, we could have get a point in that game too. But to come back and win this game was a big miss.
Commitment in the end. I think you get a bunch of new guys, and it takes some time to learn the system and how we have to play. And I think there's a little bit of trial and error at times. We've taken a lot of risk out of our game, and I think that's really helped. And the other part is, when you're getting leads, not that we're sitting on them, but you're making the other team have to probably change their game a little bit. And we've been pretty comfortable in this situation, and so it's a commitment to defense, and the guys have been doing a great job.
Yeah, I would say another game where the Lightning allow just 2, and pretty impressive considering the opponent and who they were facing last night at Amalie Arena. We're going to talk about it for the next hour. The Lightning wins 6-2 over Columbus, and the game was tighter than I think the score indicated for sure, but I think the Lightning have found a formula here where it's been pretty successful, and they're giving themselves an opportunity to win games, and even when they're not playing maybe their best offensively, maybe when they're passing up shots, maybe when their power play is not clicking at a rate we're used to seeing. Dave Mishkin, I'm going to bring you in because we've been seeing this throughout the year. I think Coop hit the nail on the head. There's a commitment. Sometimes it's better in some games than others, but you understand that they do want to play hard defensively and not make the egregious turnovers game in and game out, maybe like we've seen at times over the years when they haven't been as committed. And, look, you get a win with Jonas Johansson coming back, who was pretty rusty, in terms of not playing, and he did a really good job, again, against a team who had won 4 in a row and who is very dangerous. I thought it was an impressive win.
Yeah, I agree. Coop's quote, that's it. The Lightning have taken the risk out of their game. They're doing a very good job of closing out games when they have a lead in the third period. Their record when leading after 2, they just have 1 regulation loss that came against Washington back in November. They just have 1 non-regulation loss that came earlier, a home loss to the Flyers. They lost in a shootout. Look, you're going to have a good record when you're leading after 2. If you don't have a good record when you're leading after 2, you're not making the playoffs. So most teams win more than they lose when they take a lead in the third period. But for the Lightning to have just 2 non-wins when leading after 2, as we're into the final quarter of the regular season, tells you how good they have been at closing out games. And it's really been noticeable during this stretch where they've gotten hot, right? Just 1 regulation loss in the last 12. Am I right about that?
Yeah.
So in a lot of these games, they're taking a lead into the third period, and the other team is not really able to push and press effectively, or if they are pushing and pressing, they're not getting a lot out of it. And we can get into the game last night. Columbus statistically had a pretty impressive third period. The Blue Jackets were credited with 15 shots. They changed a whole bunch of the shots and the attempts. I did not go back and try and count the attempts, but at the end of the night, I had Columbus based on their attempts in the first 2 periods, so I just added the rest to get to their total. I had them with 30 shot attempts in the third period. That's a pretty high number. And for the game, I had them with 67 shot attempts. Well, now they're at 70 shot attempts. Does that mean they had 3 more in the third period, or those came elsewhere? I don't know. I'm just going to say this. They had 15 shots in the third period, and they had, in all likelihood, 30 or more shot attempts. That sounds like a dominating period. I'm not sure it was a dominating period for Columbus. I thought they were at their most dangerous offensively earlier in the game, and we can kind of get into Columbus and kind of as advertised, right? Like, they are a very, very dynamic offensive team, especially 5-on-5, and they have defensive problems. We saw both sides of the coin last night for the Blue Jackets. But for the Lightning, they're doing it they're keeping the goals against down. We can see that, 1 goal allowed, 2 goals allowed, sometimes a shutout. If they're allowing 3, it's usually a game where they've kind of built a little bit of a cushion and the other team is getting to 3 kind of late. And it's all due to what John Cooper is talking about. They're taking the risk out of their game. They're closing out games. They aren't getting greedy for offense. They're protecting the middle of the ice. And they did it again last night. It was a difficult lift last night, Greg, because they just said Columbus played last night as advertised.
They did.
Which is, we're not advertising them, but this is kind of what we were talking about with them. They are a top-scoring team in the NHL. They have a terrific offense this year. Aaron Portzline was saying they're gonna set the record for most goals scored in a season in Columbus franchise history, which is pretty remarkable when you consider not so much that they haven't done it before. They've missed some high-end players during a big part of their existence. Rick Nash for years was basically the only guy, right? And then they had their teams with Panarin and Duchesne, and Cam Atkinson was a very good player for them. But, their most dynamic player heading into the season was going to be Johnny Gaudreau. And he's not with us anymore and not with them. So how are they doing it? I think they're doing it because their coach has instilled a system that suits their team, but also they really execute well with the puck. And that part certainly was as advertised, but we saw it in the earlier games between the teams too. They right now, Greg, lead the NHL, number 1 in the NHL in 5-on-5 goals scored. Not ratio, not goal differential, because they're allowing a lot. But they have scored more 5-on-5 goals than any other team in the NHL this year. You could see that if you watched the game last night, if you were at the game last night, if you listened to us on radio, Phil and I were complimenting them, how good they are with the puck, moving up the ice and in the offensive zone. But they are in a wild card spot because they've been able to outscore their defensive problems this year, and those defensive problems were evident last night. The Lightning have not scored a ton of goals in some recent games because the other team is checking them. And it was clearly the best game in a while for Point, Kucherov, and Gensel. If you're not going to check that line, they have the potential to scorch you. And they had a great game last night. Brian Engblom felt it was their best game in maybe 4 or 5. I actually liked their game against Florida, but they were better last night. They were more dynamic last night, and the 3 players combined for 8 points. Chafee gets loose in the slot for a tip. Kucherov gets a breakaway from the red line in the first minute 37 of the game. And even when Columbus then kind of pressed the attack, once it was 2-0, Columbus pushed in the first period. You could see it, even as the Lightning didn't have a lot of possession and they were kind of uncomfortable because they didn't have the puck a lot. When they got the puck, they got chances. Merzlikins gave up 2 in the first. He probably made like 4 or 5 high-level saves in the first period. And in the second period, when the Lightning took over the first half of that middle stanza and scored 2 goals, they could have had more. Columbus has defensive problems. And I don't know if this is really a sustainable formula, like long term. If they get into the playoffs, they're going to have to get better, I think, defensively. And moving into next year, and maybe that's part of the plan for Dean Evison. He's like, we will tighten up defensively, but right now, this is what this team needs. They're a very exciting team, and clearly it's working for them because they're in a playoff spot when nobody thought that they were going to be. But they are a very dynamic team with the puck. What the Lightning did well when they did well last night was your theory of defense. They had the puck. So when they were able to control the puck, Columbus couldn't go on the attack. When Columbus did go on the attack, they were dangerous. And they had to lean on Johansson. They, being Columbus, was dangerous. They, the Lightning, had to lean on Johansson, and they had to hang in there. And I think to their credit, they didn't do a lot to feed the Columbus attack. It's just Columbus's attack is so good that they don't need to be fed. They can create. How many plays off the rush it was like pass, all of a sudden a 2-on-1 down low. It wasn't a turnover that created that. They were just attacking the net and executing really well with the puck. So I can see why, even at this late stage in the season, they've scored as many goals as they've scored. So it's unconventional. I mean, it really is. You don't see teams like that really a lot in the NHL that are good, that have given up as many goals as Columbus, but they still have a positive goal differential. It's even after last night.
In a weird way, it's playing to your strength.
It is.
At a very high level. I mean, because what's going to suffer from that? I'm not saying they can't play defense, but what do you always hear with younger teams? It takes them a while for whatever to do that. So if that's what you believe, and you say, listen, I understand we've got to do some things structurally to be better. Maybe it's just more awareness, but my team is loaded with more skilled players than guys who maybe can't do that. So let's see. I mean, in essence, let's try and outscore the team.
Yeah.
I mean, that's so what happens there? Your defense suffers and your goaltending's not going to have a great save percentage.
But so let me just say two things. First of all, you're like, we're loaded with skilled players. At the start of the year, did you look at this Columbus roster?
No.
Maybe other than Werenski.
No.
Who has elevated even this year.
Like, for sure.
He's been a great player. He's even better this year.
Yeah, he's good.
So they are generating, and it's not just like the top line.
Yeah.
Whatever their top line is. I mean, Fantilli, we heard from Aaron yesterday. Fantilli is better. There is no question. Kent Johnson is better. These high picks, their game has grown. But like the Corrali line, which was the fourth line, they had looks. This Joseph Labate had a couple of chances. Van Riemsdyk looked good.
But I think that's contagious. I think when you play that way, it's contagious.
Right.
Like your first lines, we're going to create. You know what? The fourth line, you can't go up and down. You need to create some offense too. And what I'm saying is I think you're absolutely right. At the beginning of the year, that's why I said they're the surprise team in the NHL. To your point, nobody saw this coming. But I also think the coaching staff, if anybody knows what they have on their team, they were probably looking at that roster and saying, all right, there's more upside offensively than I think where we're going to be defensively. So we're going to put them in a position to be successful. In many ways, that's good coaching. Because you don't want to pigeonhole skilled players to just be robots and be very good defensively, and it takes away from their creativity. I've seen that over the years where we've had this conversation with skilled players that come up and maybe play on a third and fourth line. I understand that can be a little bit different, but you ask them to take some risk out of their game. And maybe what makes them so great offensively, or at least gets them to the NHL, is that creativity. And I think in Columbus, in part without seeing a ton of their games and just talking to Aaron and watching the games we have seen, it feels like they've said, okay, we're going to have to get better defensively. But I also know we've got a lot of talent on this roster. And so if I let you guys play, maybe it'll put us in a position where the defense can come along, but the offense is going to be what's carrying us. And I think that's what's happening.
I mean, we don't need to spend the whole show talking about Columbus. Lightning won't see Columbus. I'm not. I'm going to say more about Columbus. I'm just telling the fans we can get to the Lightning. What the Lightning did well last night, and coming on the second half of a back-to-back against a rested opponent, they found the right formula to be able to grab the lead and hold on to it. But what I noticed about Columbus, especially last night, like sometimes when you're like, a high-scoring team that gives up a lot of goals, they have what Coop is saying the Lightning are doing in a good way. A team that is scoring a lot and giving up a lot is not doing this, which is too much risk in your game.
Yeah.
So, like, you're gunning for offense and you're giving up chances as a result. I actually didn't see that really from Columbus. I thought when they had the puck, they were on the attack. Let me qualify that. When they had the puck and they were moving up the ice with an opportunity to go on the attack, they were very, very good. They did not put themselves in a bad position because they were looking for offense.
Right.
Their defensive problems were almost, to me, separate. Like they're in their own zone and they have a breakdown. Yeah. Or they're in their own zone and they don't make a good play coming out of the defensive zone and they turn it over. Or they fall asleep. Like, okay, maybe that's a little bit of offense, but they weren't aware on the Kucherov breakaway. They weren't aware that he left the zone. That wasn't them being greedy for offense. That was just lack of awareness, right? So I don't know if that means that it's more or less correctable. I don't think it's a mindset. I mean, I guess it is a mindset because you have to be committed to defending. But I did not see a team that was like feeding the other team's attack as they were getting greedy offensively. I saw a really, really good offensive team.
Sure.
But when you force them to play without the puck, they struggle. Like what we've talked about at times with the Lightning, and that was a problem for the Lightning, part of the problem with the Lightning defensively last year, wasn't only turnovers. It was how aware are you of where the danger spots are when you have to play without the puck in your own end. I mean, in a way, Columbus is a great example of your theory of defense, which they've still given up a lot of goals this year. But I kind of feel when Columbus has the puck and they're going on the attack, they don't really give up a lot, right? I mean, the Lightning were kind of quiet when Columbus was making them uncomfortable. But when Columbus had trouble without the puck, or when they didn't have the puck, they had trouble. And that's why it was paramount when the game was 2-1, and that was the only point that it was a one-goal game once the Lightning got the lead. That was the beginning of the second period. The Lightning took over possession.
Yep.
Columbus had nothing going for the first 10 minutes of the second period, in part because the Lightning just didn't let them have the puck. It was like pressure, 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 pressure. Best Columbus could do is get a line change. Pressure, 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 pressure. Shot, 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 shot. And eventually Hedman takes a shot on the fourth goal, nicks off Chinikov's stick, and goes into the top of the net. If you're just firing away, I mean, you may get a little bit of a break there, and that's what the Lightning got. But they grabbed control of the first half of the second period because they didn't let Columbus do anything with the puck. And that was a big key. So then it was 4-1. They did not have a good 4-minute power play. Phil was very upset about what he was seeing during that 4-minute power play. They had the goal from point taken away due to the offside challenge. They gave up the shorthanded goal, and that lit a match under Columbus. But even then, it was still 4-2. So they had the 2-goal lead. They had a little bit of wriggle room in case something weird happened, unless Columbus made a play. And Columbus tried. Johansson was very good down the stretch in the second period to keep it 4-2. And then, as I said, I thought the third period, even though the stats tell you Columbus had a lot going on, I'm not sure the Blue Jackets were necessarily as dangerous. I mean, they were down 2, then they were down 3 with the clock working against them. And I thought they lost a little bit of their push in the third period. But that's one person's opinion.
No, I think it's valid. I think, it's maybe a stat that's going to get overlooked a little bit, or an element of the game last night that maybe gets overlooked to a degree. I mean, playing with the lead's big.
Mm-hmm.
And once again, the Lightning were able to get out to a 2-0 lead. Now, I do think for Columbus that mindset's a little bit different than another team, because I think that can be demoralizing for a team on the road getting down that early. I mean, those 2 goals, a minute 37, that's like being in a boxing match and you coming out and your opponent just knocking you in the face, like right away.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, it's like you can be shaken a little bit. But I don't know if that impacts Columbus as much as it would another team, because
they've rallied twice on the Lightning already this year. I mean, one time they didn't quite get all the way back, but the first game it was 3-0 Lightning, 11, 12 minutes into the game, and Columbus won 7-6.
So you have that, and I just think the mentality anyways of that team, I mean, I think they realize we're going to give up goals, but we can also score them. So being down 2 early in the game, I don't think is going to prevent them from still trying to do what they do. And then they get the goal from Werenski, which I thought was a soft goal. Let's call it what it is. And you could tell, and I'm not a goaltender, but it did look like Johansson was definitely off his angle, moving more to the right, and left a lot of space open to the left. And Werenski's a great player. So you have that combination, and it didn't work well for Johansson. To his credit, I think as his team got better, so did he throughout the night. And then, look, you get out to a 4-1 lead. That's impactful. The goal that was disallowed felt like it deflated things a little bit, because you're talking about a 4-goal lead compared to, end up being 4-2. And I think those are, some how you navigate those waters in a game and how you're able to deal with a little bit of that adversity was interesting to see. And the Lightning had a better third period. End up getting a couple of goals, one an empty netter, and that's fine. And we talked about the power play goal, which was big to see, if anything, for their confidence. I think power plays come and go, just like offense. So we're going to see how this transpires tomorrow night against Buffalo, who's really struggling. But I thought all in all, to put a bow on how I felt about the game in general, was coming off a loss to Florida, knowing that Columbus is a team that is right there in the playoff picture, playing well. They can make you very uncomfortable offensively, or defensively, I should say, with their offense. And yet Jonas Johansson, who was starting for the first time since when? January 28th? Was that the date? Yeah. So you have those elements. That could have been a very...
And a rested opponent that was
Yes.
waiting for you here in Tampa.
Good points.
Yeah.
That could have been a very uncomfortable game. And I'm not saying it wasn't at times, but to come out comfortably and win and get 2 points and you move on, and now you have a chance really against Buffalo to do the same thing. Yeah, that was a good win. I have very little to complain about. I know some fans disagree. We'll get to those in a little bit.
Fans are complaining after a 6-2 win?
A little bit.
Yeah.
We'll get into that. You know how it is. We can never be satisfied. And that's why we're
I wonder
here on
if
the show.
Anthony is continuing to be dissatisfied with the power play.
Well, we're going to
Because
go
he's
with
like, well,
that.
they scored in the third period, but they were up 4-2. It was a big goal. I think it kind of allowed the Lightning to be like, all right, we got this.
Yeah.
Right? I kind of felt that goal gave them that feeling, and maybe it said to Columbus, this just isn't our night, right?
Fair point. And I think that makes a lot of sense. And I also think, too, we talk about this depth scoring. Chafee gets a goal.
Mm-hmm.
And again, quietly getting
Yeah.
close to 15 goals, getting closer.
He scored in all 3 games against Columbus this year.
Yeah. Don't know what that means other than he likes playing against Columbus, but
Yeah.
we'll take it. I mean, if you were to tell me before the season started that Mitchell Chafee would be approaching 15 goals, did you have that on your bingo card? No. So, look, credit where credit's due.
Mm-hmm.
Gonsalves is playing well.
That line is playing well. Did you notice that line started the game for the Lightning? Now, some of it's the matchup. You know, Columbus is the road team. They have to set their lineup first, and it's not like Paul Gonsalves and Chafee have started every game or every period.
I just still don't know if I like that line long term, but they're playing well.
They're playing very well. John Cooper is very happy with what that line is giving them.
So when Ricard Raquel comes here, what's going to happen to that line? Because
that's a whole other kettle of fish. I mean, we are 2 days away from the trade deadline. I know we've been talking about the trade deadline for a while, but I'm like, the other day, it was Monday, right? I'm like, what?
Yeah.
The trade deadline is this week?
I know.
Feels like it snuck up on us.
I will say this. I think I always mention this at the beginning of the year, that I do feel like there are certain dates on a calendar for a sports season that are really exciting for fans. I think opening day for any sport is magical. Baseball has that romantic feeling where it's in the day and maybe you take off school and you go with your dad. Like people.
Cincinnati always had that tradition of maybe playing the first game, and it's like, it can be pretty cold in Cincinnati in April.
True. That is true.
There have been games where it's like,
did George Foster hit home runs on opening day?
George Foster loved opening day. Look, I can't vouch for the fact that George Foster's year, when he hit 35 home runs or whatever, all came when the Mets were up by like 5 runs. But there's no disputing that he was a big part of the Big Red Machine.
He hit 50 one year, I think. I think he hit 50 1 year.
Yeah, that wouldn't have been with the Mets, though. Maybe
No,
it was.
with the
Maybe.
Reds. No, it was with the Reds.
Well,
It was
for
with
sure
the Reds.
he did it with the Reds.
He
I'm
was a
trying to
great
remember
player for
that
the
year
Reds.
he was with the Mets when, if you don't know what we're talking about, you need to go back and listen to the end of
Had to have been
yesterday's
early
show,
80s, right? Had to have been early 80s because he was with.
It was early to mid 80s. He
Early
was
to
with the
mid-80s.
Mets. That was when I was in high school, and
you were George
my
Foster
friend
guy.
was he lived and died with every victory and loss. And I mean, 162. Those are
That's a lot.
Games, right?
That's a lot. Well,
of course,
that's
the
why I
Mets in
think
those days won a lot, right?
The-
They had Gooden
the
and
NFL
Strawberry and Carter and
100%.
Mookie Wilson, and they had a great team.
Nails, Dykstra, all those guys.
Yes.
But opening day in any sport, NFL is popular every game because there's not as many games, so every game is important. But I think, the opener for the NHL, for sure. I also think the trade deadline is a big, big deal, particularly if you're a team who's in contention, but I think even teams who are selling, because as that fan base, if you are a San Jose Sharks fan, if you are a Pittsburgh Penguins fan, you are now looking to see, okay, what prospects can we get back to rebuild and get going? For the Lightning, you have seen Julian Breezewell over the last handful of years get impactful players. You have a pretty good idea. It's like Santa coming. You know you're going to get something. You don't know what it is. Well, you kind of have an idea if you know what I mean. But I think Lightning fans are anticipating Friday, and I think they're anticipating some big stuff.
It takes two to tango, though, Greg. And the
Always
Lightning maybe
Always
looking,
does.
they may be knocking on doors. I mean, we hear. I mean, honestly, I don't pay attention to a lot of this because what's going to happen is going to happen with or without me following it, very, very closely. But the people who do follow this stuff, from the people who have their finger on the pulse of what is happening, like an Elliot Friedman, they're like, the Lightning are looking at this player, or the Lightning have called about these players. Well, the other team has to be willing to make a deal with the Lightning. The Lightning have to offer something that is appealing enough to the other team to choose the Lightning as the trade partner. They may end up choosing a different team. And as we've talked about, I mean, maybe we're starting to get to the point now within 48 plus hours that we're starting to see more sellers. I mean, it looks like the Bruins are basically raising the white flag. Without raising the white flag, I mean, their players are still going to continue to try and win. And, they're close enough that they could still make a run and get into the playoffs. But they just traded Trent Frederick, who's was a pretty important part of their team. And, maybe there'll be other teams like that are like, you know what, we're not going to get where we want to get this year. So let's do a reset. Let's be sellers. Let's try and gain some assets. And maybe there'll be a few more of those teams than it looked like maybe a week ago. But still, I don't know how many sellers there are going to be out there. And if there are fewer sellers, you get fewer dance partners. And that's just the way it is.
I've heard, we've been doing the show together for a while, and I was doing the show myself back in 2016 to a degree. And I can remember people saying those very same things. And I understand the logic. I'm going to go off of history and say Julian Breezewell is going to find a way.
He'll find a way. Yeah.
He's going to find a way to get something. And
you
look,
may be right.
whether you think, and I'm just throwing this out just to have fun, whether you think Ricard Raquel is a big move or not, that, relatively speaking, considering the year he's having and where he is,
he has
that
another
would be
year, doesn't he?
It's 2 more years. That would be a big move. And so let's see what happens. But I'm curious for Lightning fans out there, as we get closer to the trade deadline, are you anticipating a big move? And if you're listening, I did the air quotations. Are you anticipating a big move? Are you anticipating any move? Because I think it's fair to say something is going to go down. That being said, credit to the players on this roster who have kind of improved their play to the point where maybe they're making that decision a little harder for Julian, or maybe they're making it easier. I don't know, Dave. You tell me. If I told you the depth scoring was the one area they wanted to improve, and all of a sudden you've got a bunch of guys on this team who are performing, is Julian
Another goal
saying
from the bottom 6 yesterday?
is
Chafee.
Julian saying, you know what? I don't have to do anything? Or is he saying, man, we are clicking. Let me give this team everything they can. I'm still going to go out and make a move just to be sure.
Well, we did get some information yesterday. It happened after we went off the air, but they put Cam Atkinson on waivers.
What did that mean for people who were just tuning in and they're kind of confused?
A player who is no longer waiver exempt, in order to send that player to the minors, there are other waiver components. Like a player is signed after being in Europe. I think you have to put him through waivers maybe before he comes to the NHL team. I'm not entirely certain I have that rule right, but the conventional use of waivers. A player is in the NHL, or maybe in training camp, he's on the NHL camp roster, and you want to send him to the minors. If he's not in his first couple of years where he's waiver exempt, he has to clear waivers. That means is that every other team has an opportunity to just grab that player. But when they grab the player, they're taking the player and the contract, okay? So in order to send a player who is waiver eligible to the minors, the player must clear waivers. and it takes 24 hours. You put him on waivers one day, and then 24 hours later, he's either cleared or he hasn't. If he clears, you do not have to send the player to the minors right away or at all. But you can. Once he's cleared waivers, now you have the green light to send the player down, and that window, like the light stays green for 30 days. So people were confused maybe a little bit because they're like, they put Atkinson on waivers, but then he played last night. Well, first of all, we don't know if he's cleared waivers until later today. We're pre-taping, but even if we weren't, I think it's 2 o'clock that we learn about the waiver claims, if there were any, or if a player clears. So he was eligible to play last night. If he clears waivers, he's eligible to play tomorrow.
Yeah.
It's just that now the Lightning have the flexibility to be able to send him down and save every penny of his contract because they think he makes $850.
Yes.
So all of that goes to zero if he's playing in the minors. They have to pay him the money. He's on one way, but the cap hit goes to zero. So,
And they got
again,
Logan Brown. Right? Didn't they sign Logan Brown?
yeah,
to
so
an NHL
Brown was
contract?
never signed. Brown was on an AHL contract.
Gotcha.
So same kind of deal. Once they signed her to the NHL contract, he basically was up in the NHL, but he wasn't because they put him on waivers right away. So once he clears, I mean, they must have their reasons for signing Logan Brown, and maybe they would have signed him if he hadn't gotten hurt back in training camp. He's already in Syracuse. But once he's under contract, they could call him back up. The other option is they could have, if they chose to call him up, they could have called him up, signed him to a contract, and kept him up, and then he wouldn't have to clear waivers. Anyway, Brown's kind of a separate category. People are like, what are they doing with Cam Atkinson? I think there are one of two possibilities. The more likely possibility is they want to have the flexibility leading up to the deadline to maybe create a little more cap room under $1 million. But that's still not nothing, right?
Yep.
So if they need to make a quick move to create maybe an extra $850,000 in cap space, now they can just send Atkinson down, assuming he clears. And they have that money available. The other option, I think this is less likely, but given the opponent they had last night, somebody floated this suggestion to me that Columbus may be interested in reacquiring Cam Atkinson. And based on his history there, they're a fairly young team. I mean, they're not young. Sean Monahan, who's injured, but I mean, he's going to be coming back. He's a veteran. But maybe they're kicking the tires on that. And I mean, that would mean that the Lightning are ready to move on from Cam Atkinson, but they played him last night so Columbus could see him, right? This wasn't my idea. Somebody mentioned this to me. So we'll see if Columbus picks him up. If they pick him up, it's kind of a clean transaction, right? There's no trade there or anything like that. And it allows Atkinson to round out this year back in Columbus. I think that's the less likely of the two scenarios. And then the third option is he clears waivers, but he just stays with the Lightning. And they don't need to free up the cap space. We'll see. But I think the most likely explanation is it gives the Lightning some flexibility. But just because a player clears waivers doesn't mean necessarily that he's going down. Usually it does.
Right.
But it's not required that you send the player down once he clears. Hopefully that clears,
I think that was really
clears things up for the
hopefully-
fans.
Do we want to get into some questions? Or
Yeah.
Do we want to anything else that we want to break down? I'm sure.
Well, I want to say a word on Werenski, who has been a good player. I mean, he's been an all-star. He's had a few injury problems in his career. Actually, I have his stats up here.
You feel like he's just taken off this year to a degree, right? Maybe to a large degree.
So, look, he was a high draft pick. He was 8th overall in 2015. He played 2 years at the University of Michigan and basically went right to the NHL out of college. At the end of his final season in college, he went to Lake Erie, which was their AHL affiliate, and I believe they won the Calder Cup that year, 2015-16, because he played 17 games in the playoffs. But the next year was his first pro year, and he went straight to the NHL. So he's been in Columbus since 2016-17. And he hit 20 goals last night. He has scored 20 goals before. He actually scored 20 goals in the 2019-2020 season that ended in March. So had we had a full season that year, he would have eclipsed 20 goals. But to me, there is no question that he has taken a step forward this year, or at the very least kind of gotten back to the level he was at before he had some injury problems and Columbus really struggled. Because his first few years in the NHL, Columbus was a playoff team. I mean, they made the playoffs the first 4 years that he was in the NHL. And he was a big part of those teams. He is now a superstar. He's a superstar. I mean, he controlled so much of that game when Columbus had the puck. He was the guy stirring the drink. Kind of like Kucherov and Point can do that for the Lightning. Werenski does that for Columbus. He can transport the puck. He's all over the ice. I mean, that was something Aaron Portzline said. He's like, you're going to see Werenski below the goal line in the offensive zone. He's such a good skater that, he can put himself maybe in a tough spot for other players, but he's such a good skater, he can get back defensively. So smart. And Brian Engblom told me during the intermission, it was after the first when Werenski had scored the goal in the first period. He's like, he shoots the puck as well as a forward. Any forward, he said, any forward in the NHL, or maybe as a forward in the NHL. He was very impressed with his ability to shoot because it's a little deceptive because he doesn't telegraph the shot. He's kind of skating, then whoop, it's off the stick. And Phil actually didn't mind the goal that he scored in the first period from the Johansson perspective. Other people were kind of like you that I heard. They were like, he was a little slow to react to that. But there's no question it was a very good shot from Werenski, and it was a sneaky shot because he pulls the trigger so quickly. He has reached superstar status in my mind, and I think he is going to garner a lot of votes from the Norris Trophy this year, deservedly so. Will he win it? There is some competition there. McCarr's having another very good year, but I mean, if Columbus makes the playoffs,
McCarr level? Is he on McCarr's level? That's a big
Yeah,
thing to say.
I mean, first of all, McCarr has more weapons around him. McCarr has McKinnon, right? I shouldn't say more weapons. McCarr has McKinnon. Werenski doesn't have a McKinnon on the team, even though we can acknowledge that Kirill Marchenko is having a good year.
Maybe
Kirill Marchenko is
also,
not Nathan McKinnon.
Maybe
right?
Werenski is McKinnon as well.
Yeah, I mean, McKinnon is like, he's like a thoroughbred, though.
He's
like,
a bull.
Yeah, he's clomping down the ice. Werenski's smoother.
Yeah.
Werenski actually skates like McCarr. McCarr skates like Werenski. They're very smooth and kind of deceptive. I don't know. I mean, they're not alike, but they're comparable, I think. I think McCarr has a little more deception in his game. Like, he can do that little juke move at the blue line. Werenski will just basically skate past you. Yeah. And he skates to space. His awareness of where there are soft spots on the ice when he has the puck is very impressive. Because he can kind of like weave around, and it's hard to contain him. I mean, I guess McCarr kind of does that too, but I don't notice it as much from McCarr.
You know how these awards go. If he doesn't win it this year puts him on the map to win it next year. That's usually
he's leading all NHL players in average ice time, and he played almost 30 minutes last night. Now, they were down.
And this is what you see from great defensemen, though, right? They play.
Yeah.
They just play. And look, part of great coaching wasn't a big part of that decision, just to kind of look at Werenski and say, oh, yeah, just go play.
Mm-hmm.
Just go up and down. I mean, that's...
Use your instincts.
Yeah, but I think as a coach, that's smart.
Right.
Like, you need to be doing a lot of things. Yeah, you may make mistakes, but you're probably going to make way more positive plays than negative.
Mm-hmm.
Go out and play. And look at him. I mean, unleashed. Maybe that's unleashed.
Yeah.
Unleash the beast.
So if Columbus gets in the playoffs, and right now, I don't know what like the odds makers would say, but I would say they have a better than 50-50 shot of getting in because they're currently in playoff position. And we mentioned they've been a terrific home team this year, 26-4 through 30 games.
Right.
And they have the vast majority of their games down the stretch at home.
Yeah.
They're going to have to do it. They're going to take care of business. And if I were on the Columbus side, I would probably say I'd love to see them get just a smidge better defensively. Because if they can get a smidge better defensively, I think their offense is going to continue to make other teams uncomfortable. So we'll see. I mean, if you were to to ask me right now, I think they're getting in. You know, don't fall asleep on the fact New Jersey is scuffling a little bit right now.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, Carolina's hanging in there. Carolina had a win in Detroit last night. You just get the feeling Carolina has enough. They're hardened enough, and I mean that in a good way, that, like, if all of a sudden they might be in jeopardy of slipping out of the top 3, they're going to, like, right the ship, right? And rattle off, you know, like 3 out of 4 and give themselves a little bit more breathing room. New Jersey is kind of like, we were out of the playoffs last year. We need to get back in. They've been on a long road trip. Jack Hughes got hurt. They lost again last night. They were in Dallas. I got to look and see where, I mean, Columbus lost obviously last night too. I want to see what the gap is between New Jersey and Columbus. New Jersey's at 72 points. Columbus is at 68 with 2 games in hand. That's how close it is. New Jersey's 4-6 in the last 10. Yeah. So is Carolina, but Carolina's won the last 2. There's a chance Columbus could get into the top 3 in the Metro, and then they wouldn't have to worry about the wild card. So I like their chances to get in. What kind of a matchup would they be for their first-round opponent? Their first-round opponent, if the regular season is any indication, their first-round opponent will get scoring chances, but it is going to be a nerve-wracking playoff series because Columbus can make you very, very uncomfortable defensively.
Yeah, and I don't, would you agree? I don't know. I mean, the first round of the playoffs, is that more of a wild card than how the second and third and fourth rounds are going to be?
Sometimes we see those crooked scores in the first round.
You do. I would say in general, Columbus would be a little bit of a shock to how playoff hockey is, because if you're used to running and gunning, and I'm just going to call it that, you can use whatever you want.
We're parsing, but I know what you mean.
All of a sudden now you're playing a 2-1 game, or instead of 5 goals a game, you're only generating 2. And if your defense hasn't been able to close that gap from where it was in the regular season, I could see that being a very short series.
Yeah.
Just because regular season hockey and playoff hockey are dramatically different. We are praising Columbus for what they're doing in the regular season. But you and I both know, come postseason, what is that offense going to look like?
Teams can check in the playoffs. Teams that have success in the playoffs check.
Yeah.
So if you're going to check Columbus and take away their time and space best you can,
right,
you will force their offense to do some things or else dry up. But what I noticed from Columbus was, I mean, it's not like the Lightning were really out of position on some of these plays. They just kind of were able to execute to a level where they broke down the Lightning. Not egregiously. I mean, it wasn't like breakaways, but there were some near misses there where a guy was in the clear and they didn't quite, execute on the last pass to set up the grade A chance. And so that brings up an interesting question. If they get into the playoffs, whoever they get as an opponent may try and D them up. Maybe they're able to just break down the defense. I mean, it can happen. It's rare. Usually a team that takes away time and space and is committed to doing that and is good at doing that because they know how to do it will dictate the terms of the series, and you'll have a low-scoring series. That's why that series last year between Colorado and Winnipeg was so intriguing to me, because Winnipeg did D up during the regular season. They were right there with Florida, tied for first in goals allowed per game, best last year during the regular season, and Colorado scored like crazy. It's kind of like, what kind of series are we going to have here?
Good point.
Who is going to dictate the terms of the series? It was Colorado. That was a high-scoring series. Advantage Avalanche. The one game Winnipeg won was a shootout-type game. I mean, not a shootout. It wasn't like 3-on-3 tie. They went to the shootout, but it was a high-scoring game 1. Winnipeg survived it, but they weren't able to kind of settle the games down.
Right.
Those games were wide open. Hellebuck wasn't very good in the series.
And maybe that was a
apparently,
matchup thing, too. Maybe that was a matchup.
Maybe that was it.
But
matchup. When you have a McCarr and a McKinnon and at the time Rantanen, it's difficult to check them, right? They can get loose, and they did. They dictated the terms of the series. So for Columbus to win a series, based on how they're playing right now, they would have to basically be in the driver's seat of how the series is going to be played.
By the way,
it would need to be a high-chance series.
I would agree.
If it's a high-chance series, they will still be in a position to maybe outscore their defensive problems.
Sure.
If it's
And
going to
then
be
it
a
comes-
low-scoring checking series, they're going to have to match what the other team is doing checking. And I don't think that they've shown that they can do that consistently this year.
And I think you got
Based on their stats.
and you got to get a stop.
Got to get a stop.
Comfortable with a goaltender with a save percentage under 9.
Yeah.
Now, that might not be Merzlikin's fault. That's maybe a product of how they play. I understand that. But again, your goaltender is probably going to have to be a lot better in the postseason. You can't have those. I mean, I am reminded so often the year the Lightning played was the Hurricanes. Tight series, and Nedeljkovic, who was the
Soft
starter
goal
for
here,
Carolina.
soft goal
I
there.
mean,
There weren't many.
But I mean, it was like, all right, at the inopportune times. By the way, I have been reading more and more pundits, experts throw around that Mikko Rantanen, like teams are inquiring about him.
Well, the reason that would happen, Carolina acquired Rantanen and gave up a very, very good player to get him, Natchez. They also traded Jack Drury, who I like. I mean, he was a good bottom 6 center, penalty killer, little bit of offensive pop. He's a good player. Colorado got 2 good players. Neither player is considered at the level of a Rantanen, though, who is one of the top players in the NHL. Carolina, I think, acquired Mikko Rantanen with the expectation that they would sign him to a long-term deal, as they signed Natchez to a long-term deal. Colorado doesn't have to worry about the Natchez contract. He's under contract. They've got this guy for the next, 6-7 years, whatever his extension was. If Rantanen is indicating that he's going to walk at the end of the year, I mean, what happened with Jake Gensel last year with Carolina, right? They acquired him. They gave up assets to get him. That was right at the deadline, right? And then Gensel decided he didn't want to re-up with Carolina, and he signed with the Lightning. If they think we're going to lose Rantanen at the end of the year, we need to get something for him rather than lose him for nothing. And we like our team enough. Like, it's not going to prevent us from maybe making a deep run, although you can make an argument that their team would be worse without Mikko Rantanen than with Mikko Rantanen. But if they're concerned about losing him for nothing, that's why they would make a second trade, basically, getting him and then moving him before the deadline. Pierre LeBrun had a comment. He's like, even if you lose Rantanen, why not? You don't know you're going to lose him, first of all. Why don't you keep him, try and go on a long playoff run, and that may actually sway Rantanen into re-signing too. Like, let's say they have a really deep run. Rantanen's like, you know what? I like what we've got here. You're going to make more of an argument to stay based on, maybe not more of an argument to stay, but you can make a compelling argument to a pending free agent to stay if you have a spectacular playoff run, right? And you're more likely to have a spectacular playoff run with Mikko Rantanen on the roster. That was Pierre's point. But it's up to the Hurricanes as far as how they want to handle this. And they just got burned last year with Gensel.
Yeah.
So I think
I get it.
Those elements are factoring in.
I just think
They're also kind of a hard line team with negotiating. They're kind of like, this is what we're offering. If you don't like it, see you later.
Bye-bye.
Yeah.
I get that. I just when you acquire that guy, and to your point, you give up what you gave up.
Mm-hmm.
Let's make it work, even if I know you're not going to be here in the long run. I mean, that's just kind of the risk you take with a trade. But I understand. Organizations have to make moves. Sean says, don't get me wrong, I love Point. However, that shorthanded goal exemplifies my main issue with his style of play. When you're up 3 and on a power play, why do you not hook or slash Werenski into oblivion on that play? He needs to evaluate risk-reward there.
Maybe he wasn't certain they could make the play.
I think
that was
surprised.
a really well-executed play.
I think he was surprised Werenski beat him the way he did.
Yeah.
How many people outskate Braden Point?
Mm-hmm.
Watch the play. I don't think Point realizes that the Werenski, the burst. And that's what it was. It was a burst at the last moment. And it was a great deflection. Great pass, too. Let's not minimize this.
Mm-hmm.
I'm more inclined to say if you're going to fault Point for anything, it's just more of an awareness of who you're with. But my sense was Point did not expect Werenski to beat him the way he did at the end there.
And
it doesn't
that
happen.
kind of fits in. I tend to agree with you, Greg. I mean, ultimately, it was his man, and he got beat by his man, and his man
happens.
scored. So he has to accept some blame
yeah.
there. But there is a difference between feeding the other team's attack. Look, the Lightning had a turnover just inside the offensive blue line, and Ken Johnson makes a really good play there. He banks it off the boards, up ice to Fantilli. So that was the first domino to fall in a bad way for the Lightning. But I felt like a lot of what Columbus was able to generate last night, they generated just through really high-level play. And it wasn't that the Lightning fell asleep. Like, on the Columbus side, Columbus fell asleep on the Kucherov breakaway. I mean, he has a breakaway from the red line in. They're completely unaware that he has fled the zone. The shot from Matejchuk is wide, so there's a ricocheting rebound. Gensel is ready to get it. One of those two defensemen has to be aware that Kucherov is in a position to hurt you. The Lightning didn't have a lot of plays like that last night. I think Columbus was able to generate what it generated based on just well-executed plays like that Fantilli pass to Werenski. Fantilli makes a perfect pass, and to your point, Werenski had the burst at the end to put himself in a position to make a play. That's why I was impressed with what they were doing offensively and why I kind of posed the question. You can try and check them. You can be committed to checking them, and they may still score. I understand it's regular season, but the other team gets the stat sheet too. The other team is seeing what Columbus can do. The other team is like, the Blue Jackets are in a playoff position. The Blue Jackets have given up all these goals, but they've scored more than they've allowed. The Blue Jackets lead the NHL in 5-on-5 goals for. It's not like there's some mystery, right? So you can come in like,
Agreed.
We need to try and limit their chances. If we're going to lose this game, we're going to lose this game because they score on us. Let's try and stop them from scoring. And teams have not been able to do that consistently against Columbus, which is why the Blue Jackets are leading the NHL in 5-on-5 goals scored. We're not talking about power play goals. I sound like Allen Iverson. We're not talking about power play goals, where you have an extra guy on the ice. We're talking about 5-on-5, even Steven. Let's play. Columbus has showed 5-on-5, they can score. You can try and defend them.
100%.
They're going to score.
Agreed. And look, the other thing we talked about too, it's what we saw with Barkov. Sometimes the other team, their best player is going to make a play.
Yeah.
And did it come at the expense of Braden Point? Yeah, but that happens. Braden Point has made other players look a little silly too. So I'm not going to lose sleep over
Braden
it.
Point had a pretty good game yesterday too.
Yeah. I mean, that's how many 30-goal scorers are the Lightning going to finish the year with?
Well, Gensel's now at 29.
Right. What's Cooch?
He's over 30.
He, Point, Gensel,
Hagel. Yeah.
I think the next closest may be Cirelli.
I'm pulling up their stats right now. Cooch is at, I was wrong. Cooch is at 28. I should have known that because he scored last night. So
he's going to
close
get
to 30, and Gensel's at 29. They
So they're
currently
gonna
have Hagel and Point.
They're
So
going
they're
to
going to be at
scorers.
4.
And what's Cirelli, 20?
20.
And Paul's at 18?
Yeah.
Okay. They could have 6 players at 25 plus.
Mm-hmm.
That's pretty impressive.
Cooch is at 90 points.
Yeah.
So they had a stat. It's the 5th 90-point season. I mean, some of these is just like you're reading it and you're just
You just
like,
make up a stat.
well, I mean, everything Kucherov has done offensively in his career is impressive. So it's kind of like, all right, it's his 5th 90-point season, 3rd in a row, and tied Stamkos with the most consecutive 90-point seasons and all of that. But I mean, like when all is said and done, Kucherov's going to have every offensive record in the books.
He's going to be a Hall of
for the
Famer.
Lightning.
And
Maybe Stamkos will finish with more goals because Kucherov has been a facilitator. But I mean, every other stat, Kucherov is going to be way ahead.
Cooch will finish with over 500. It just depends on what type of. Does he become a little bit more of a shooter as he gets older? He's a great one-timer.
Yeah.
And I'm not comparing him to Ovechkin, but if he really wanted to and just be a guy who bombs away, he could.
Yeah.
He really could. I mean, he's got a great shot. It's interesting, that dynamic with Russians. Who's the greatest Russian offensive player of all time? Notice I said offensive player. I do think there's a little bit of a difference there. And there have been some really good ones,
Offense
obviously.
is goals and assists.
That is correct.
I mean, you're not saying goal scorer, because if you said goal scorer, it would be Ovechkin.
Of course.
But
Of course.
would you say Fedorov? Fedorov was Bure, Pavel Bure. I'm talking about
I'm going to say a name, and it's just you got to take a look at his.
Kovalev,
I'm going to Malkin.
Malkin. Yeah,
I mean, look at his
Thank
numbers.
you.
Look at
I
his
thought you were going
numbers.
to say Kovalev because you
No,
loved Kovalev.
The thing with Kovalev is he was so inconsistent.
He was inconsistent.
Kovalev, his numbers should have been more.
Yeah.
There's no reason why that guy shouldn't have been at 500, maybe even 600 goals. He was incredible, but he was almost like he was too talented. He got bored. He would do things like you're scratching your head, but there was no better power play point man than Kovalev. And I'm not talking about Kucherov. It goes through him. Kovalev, because of his skating and stick handling, could get the puck from his own end, make a couple of moves, bring it in, and then the power play starts. He was incredible. I compared him. I would always joke when I would watch him. Allen Iverson had the crossover.
Yeah.
When you watch Kovalev, he would just – that's all he did. He would shake. But Russians are notorious for skill. I mean, honestly, Kovalchuk, Bure, Ovechkin, Malkin, Kucherov. I mean, these are dynamic – Mogilny. Dynamic players.
I mentioned Fedorov.
Kucherov, points-wise, because I think he's going to play for a long time. I don't know if his body takes a beating. He's pretty smart that way.
How about Pavel Datsyuk? He never finished among the most prolific
Points-wise,
scoring players,
yeah.
but you can make the argument he may have been the most well-rounded Russian player.
It's fair
because he was so good defensively.
He's almost like the Patrice Bergeron.
Mm-hmm.
Very good two-way guy. Would I take him over Malkin at his prime? It's an interesting conversation.
Yeah, they're different.
They are different
You
players.
like both of them, right?
We do. We love both of them, actually. Basil says, not to be confused with Basil, solid but not exceptional game by the Bolts. Looked tired at times, but found energy in the third and rallied. Certainly showed that they can compete with anyone. Did you get the sense they looked tired? I know Phil made a comment. I think it might have been in
He mentioned
between one of the
Hagel and
breaks.
Sorelli. They've done a lot of heavy lifting. I mean, I think Phil was like you about the Four Nations. He's
What
like,
gave
what
that
are
away?
they doing? I mean, it was a great tournament, and the players who played in it really enjoyed playing in it.
Of course
And,
they did.
Yeah, I think that it was a net benefit, not a net negative. But they didn't.
Well, you
get
and
a
I will
break.
disagree on
It's-
that.
It's true.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
Okay.
I mean, I think the players that played in that tournament, particularly if they haven't had a lot of exposure either through the playoffs or just these international competitions that are, well, I'm just going to use this term best on best. I understand it's not because there were some countries that
definitely
weren't there.
not best on best.
But
you're
you know what I mean?
Yeah,
like
I do.
the players that played in that tournament were among the best in the NHL. It's just that we had some of the best players not playing in the tournament. Sure. I think that can be a benefit for some players that are newer to it. And I would put Hagel in that category. Hagel played in a Stanley Cup final with the Lightning his first year, but I think that this can benefit him as an experience in the long term. In the short term, has it had an effect on him? I don't know. I mean, it was the second half of a back-to-back, Basil, and that was not going to be an easy lift. I mean, we said it was going to be a circumstantial disadvantage for the Lightning.
Hagel plays
Was it
hard.
Basil who had the comment that they looked tired in the Washington game too?
I don't know.
Or maybe it was the first two periods against Florida.
Yeah.
I don't know. I mean, I'm just going to say this. The Lightning are 10-1-1 in their last 12. So they're doing a lot right. And really what they're doing right is playing defensively. And if you're tired, a tired player is more likely to make a mistake.
Yeah.
Defensively.
I agree.
And the Lightning are limiting chances. When he says it was, however he put it, an okay game, not great, I think, again, at the risk of repeating myself and ourselves, this is due to what Columbus is able to do to the opposition, whether you're playing the second half of a back-to-back or not. They've done it to the Lightning in the 3 games to different levels, but they've done it in all 3 games, and they've done it to opponents throughout the year.
What is
At
the
this
bar?
point, 60-plus games in,
Yes.
like you often say, you are who you are. Like the stats are going to give you a pretty clear picture of kind of how your team goes about its business. Doesn't give you the full picture always, but you can get a lot of information from the stats. And then if you watch the team, you can kind of see if it jives with the stats or not. I mean, the people that see the Blue Jackets every game really know that team. There is no question that Columbus is a handful, and they can make you look off in terms of what you're trying to do defensively. But at the end of the night, the Lightning held them to 2 goals.
What's your bar? The Lightning are coming off a game against the Panthers the next night against the team who had won 4 in a row, who's in a playoff spot, and you limit them to 2 goals.
Yeah.
Not every game in an 82-game season are you going to be crisp, especially not now.
And they had a dominant, they being the Lightning, dominant first 10 minutes of the second period, which in some ways won them the game. They made a 2-1 game, 4-1, and they were all over Columbus.
Was that the shift? The shift, or multiple shifts, where Hedman scores off the boards?
Yeah.
That was a dominant shift.
Yeah, but they had a few of those.
Yes, they did.
It actually started with the Gensel goal, which came early in the period, and from that point, they really grabbed the game by the throat.
Yes.
But, momentum can shift, right? They got the Werenski shorthanded goal, and things shifted a little bit. But, I have a hard time coming out of that game. If someone's going to try and make the argument, and, Basil didn't say I'm making the argument, but this was his opinion, that's fine. It's like, they look tired. Well, not in the first 10 minutes of the second period. That in some ways, that was the critical part of the game.
Yep.
Because it turned a close game into a comfortable lead for the Lightning.
Yep.
They never lost a multi-goal lead after they hit the halfway point of the second period.
For sure.
Would you have liked to see them bury Columbus with that 4-minute power play? Of course. But they didn't. And by the way, the fan who was like, Hagel should be on the first power play, they went back to that in the third period. Mm-hmm. And Hedman scored.
Yeah.
So, again, I think they're still trying to figure out how they want the power play to work, and we'll see if they can get anyone at the deadline that may factor in to kind of settling these power play units, potentially.
When they get Raquel,
yeah,
he can line up in the slot with his shot, and that's fine. I think when push comes to shove, when the playoffs begin, depending on a major move, and that could happen, so that's a little bit of a asterisk there. I think they go back to what they used to do. I do.
With Hagel, you mean?
Yeah, and I think you put Point in
in
that slot. Gensel near the goal line, Cooch where he is, Hedman bombing away. And because that's familiarity, and I think in the playoffs there's something to be said for knowing what you're going to get to a degree.
Mm-hmm.
It can always change. That's what my bold take will be. Maybe we'll get Mike Harrington on tomorrow to talk about Buffalo. It's been a while.
I don't know if he's traveling still.
Is he traveling?
But I mean, I don't know. We
he's
haven't
never won
seen
to pass
Buffalo
up
this year.
I know, but he's
it's
never
the last team the Lightning haven't seen.
Which is crazy when you think about the schedule.
Mm-hmm.
He's never won to
Is that the right way of saying this is the last team the Lightning haven't seen? I think fans know what I mean.
Yeah,
They've not yet seen Buffalo, even though it's
Yes.
a divisional opponent. They only play the Sabres 3 times this year.
Yeah.
It's one of those teams they play 3 instead of 4, but it is strange that we're into game 62 for the Lightning, and they'll play their first game of the year.
And maybe the Lightning will make a big trade with Buffalo.
Well, some of the fans have been like, Alex Tuck.
Alex Tuck, all he has to do is
go
to the other locker
even
room.
said to me, we had this conversation, I know we're a little over, but Phil and I were
okay.
talking before the game last night, and we were talking about Alex Tuck, and I'm just like, I do not understand why the Buffalo Sabres would be trading Alex Tuck. I confess, I am not in the weeds on what's going on in Buffalo, and Phil's like, I'm hearing that they are looking to move Alex Tuck. And it's not quite the same, but remember when the Blackhawks traded Brandon Hagel and Jonathan Toews were like, how is whatever we're trying to accomplish, whether it's a rebuild or however you want to frame it, how is this conversation not including Brandon Hagel? And it's kind of like the Sabres want to get from where they are to a better spot. And that's been the case for years. Mm-hmm. But if they're going to make that move, how is that move up the standings going to happen? How is it better going to happen without Alex Tuck? He's 28 years old. He's in the prime of his career. He's a proven goal scorer. He's a terrific player.
And he wants to be.
But look, if they want to trade him, go for it. Go for
Well,
it.
that's why they're Buffalo, and that's why Chicago is where Chicago is.
Well, I'm talking about Alex Tuck, but yeah.
No, I know. No, but I mean, that's what happens when organizations don't know what they're doing, that they make these decisions, and they never keep
He's
it
got
out
a
of their
year
own
left
way.
on his contract, too,
Yeah.
Tuck.
Unless
it's not like
somebody's
they're in jeopardy of losing him. And Tuck likes upstate New York. He's
So
from
let me
Syracuse.
ask you this. Let me ask you this before we go to break. Lightning fans would have a fit, because if you acquire him, you know who's going back. You know who's going to go back in that deal. It's Isaac Howard. There's no way you're getting Tuck and not getting a player like that. I mean, Buffalo has scouts too, and they'll say, okay, this guy got a year left on his contract. He's 28 years old. He's a really good player. Actually probably fits to what you guys need. I need Howard. Maybe we can have a conversation about Crozier, and then you give me a draft pick. Are you willing to give up that for Tuck?
That's a Julian Breezeball question.
That's a Julian Breezewalk question. Steve, let's get Julian on tomorrow. He's not busy. I think it's a valid question, and it's one we can have. I probably wouldn't make that deal, and I'll just give you my honest opinion, because I think the Lightning can give up some other pieces without dipping into those type of prospects. That being said, if Julian feels like they're a tuck away.
He's bold. I mean, he
If
is
they're a
bold
tuck
about
away,
making moves. Yeah.
I have a hard time thinking Crozier and Howard are going to be dealt. But then again, maybe Sidney Crosby comes back in a deal. and that would be funny. But we'll talk about that at another time. Partner, great job.
Yeah.
We'll do it again
Lightning
tomorrow.
and Sabres tomorrow. I'll be in studio tomorrow. Stella alongside. She's got a TGH shift in the morning. So
right.
you
So she'll
never see her, though. Since there was a time where you used to come in for the show.
Maybe.
We did it in the radio booth, I remember, didn't we?
Sometimes.
And we freezed our rear ends off.
did.
And then Steve was like, why don't you come down to the studio?
Yeah.
So I'm like, okay, it's nice and comfortable in there.
Why not? She'll fall asleep. Can't blame her.
Anyway, the dog doesn't care. She's just like, I worked my shift this morning. I'm going to collapse.
I'm going to hang out. I'm going to listen to Power Lunch.
Yeah, well, that puts her to sleep for sure. Steve and Jared can attest
right.
to that. She just lays like a lump on the studio floor during that hour.
We will do it again tomorrow. Thanks to Steve and Jared. Thanks to everybody who listened. We always appreciate you guys. Hit us up on Twitter @Bolts Radio. I'm Greg Linnelli. You've been listening to Power Lunch on Lightning Radio.